Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I brought notes, not because I don't know my own testimony, but because I didn't want to add extraneous stuff. I wanted us to get home tonight. I know everyone wants that. I was a Christian my whole life. Where did I drop? Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, my parents were Christian. They went to First Methodist in Cameron, Texas, where I was born. And they believed in God. I believed in God because my parents believed in God. So if they said God was good and God forgives sin and God, by grace, saves us, then I knew that was true and everything. But when I was 10, I had a little upset in Sunday school. A young boy said, "There is no way to prove that there is a God." I was just shocked. I thought, well, my parents believe in God. Surely that's not true. Even my great-great-grandfather, in fact, interesting fact is that before the Methodist Church here in San Marcos had a church building, the Methodists met in my great-great-grandfather's home, John Pitts. So I'm a Methodist from way back. But anyway, this 10-year-old boy really disturbed me to think that somehow my parents believed in God, even though God's existence could not be proven. So I went and I'm outside that day to really think through that, and I sat under a huge oak tree in our yard and picked up a small acorn that was near me, and it had cracked open, and there was a sprout, a tree. I mean, it was almost like the tree I was leaning against, except that it was just the brand new sprout of a great oak tree. And I was so overwhelmed by the reality that there could be a tree inside a tiny acorn that could grow into a monster tree, that I said, I don't care if you can prove God exists or not. I choose to believe in God. And I guess all my life I've made that decision to believe in God. And interestingly enough, 20 years later I was ordained a deacon in the church, not the Methodist church, but I was ordained a deacon in the Orthodox. And a woman came up and she was real embarrassed. Several people had brought gifts to my ordination. And Bibles, study Bibles, communion set for the sick, things like that. And she said, "You will think I'm crazy, and I'm so embarrassed, but I brought you a gift, and it makes no sense, and I tried not to buy it, but I passed it by, and God kept saying, that's what I want you to get for her." It was a beautiful carved acorn. It was so beautiful, and it really was precious to me, maybe my most precious gift, because I knew God was remembering my commitment as a young age. Strangely enough, even though God did many miracles in my life, I did not really have what I would call an abundant life. And I wanted to have, but I tended to see the negative in everything. If one thing went wrong in my day, anything good could happen, but I would just focus on what didn't go right. And needless to say, that can ruin your whole life when you focus on what doesn't go right instead of what does go right. Well, eventually, I ended up in college, and God was still important to me. I attended church regularly. Even in college, I wanted to know God. I wanted to be as close to God as I could be, but I didn't see how I could be really close to God. I wanted to be God's friend, and it didn't happen, and I didn't know why. Well, one Sunday, my roommate had her Bible teacher over. She came every Sunday, and she wanted me to go to the Bible study, but I had a headache, and so I refused. Well, I don't think the teacher or my roommate thought that it was a headache that kept me from going. I think they thought I was probably an atheist or something. But when she got back, she said, the teacher wants you to read Psalm 91, and she wants you to read it out loud. And in summary, 91 says, God will be your refuge. he will surely save you from the deadly pestilence at noonday, and he will put his wings over you to protect you. 1,000 may fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but it won't happen to you. God will protect you. And don't be afraid of the noisome pestilence at noon. Well, the next day was a Monday. It was August the 1st, 1966, and I'm sure that y'all don't really know anything about August 1st, but that was the day that Charles Whitman, another student, decided he was going to kill as many students as he could that day. I studied in the tower that day, and when I walked out, there was no one on campus. Now, there were 10,000 students registered, and they had been there that morning, but they were gone, and I didn't know what. I was really confused. And then I looked, and there was a bus, a city bus stopped in the middle of Guadalupe, which is the street right we call the drag, and it is stopped right in front of the bookstore, the university bookstore, almost as if everybody on the bus suddenly decided they just had to have a book because the bus was empty. And there was a young boy sprawled out on the pavement, his bicycle beside him, and nobody was helping him. And I still didn't know what was going on. And a girl finally appeared, and she was coming toward me, and she screamed, and she grabbed her side, and suddenly 2 students came out of the library and grabbed her and took her inside. And I thought, wow, I wonder if she had appendicitis or something. I couldn't quite figure out what the heck had happened to her. I did hear gunfire. I knew that somebody was shooting. I really didn't think it was gunfire. I thought it was actually the school cannon, Smokey, because the cheerleaders, excuse me.
Here we go.
Let me put it somewhere. Cheerleaders were constantly firing off Smokey. I assumed that's what it was. It didn't compute that it was a gun someone was shooting. But then another student showed up, and I finally realized students were everywhere. They hadn't vanished. They were hiding. They were hiding behind columns. They were hiding behind stairs, any place they could find. The base of the flagpole, the mailbox receptacle they were hiding behind it. And he screamed at me. He said, "Run, we're being shot at." And so with him, I ran to the front of the mall, the worst place you could go. I didn't know that Whitman was above us shooting down. I thought the bullets were coming from across the street. There was echo or something. Well, needless to say, it was just about noonday, and I'd never seen people die before. I'd never seen so much blood before. And anybody that needed help if someone tried to help them, they got killed. So it was really agonizing to watch that. And it was an hour and a half, and it was 100 degrees that day. Moving was dangerous, but I just had to move to get off the concrete. So I moved over to the grass. I didn't get shot at. In fact, when it ended, nobody had shot at me, and Charles Whitman had been killed finally by a policeman. And you would think that I would be so grateful to God for saving my life, because it was so clear from Psalm 91 that God had intentionally saved my life that day. But I was angry at God for saving me. I was angry that he allowed me to live, because I was so unworthy, and all those other students seemed so much more worthy than me. And it really hated that they had died. And so that didn't do a lot for my relationship with God, but I still loved God. I was angry, but I wanted still to know God. I still wanted to have a relationship. I still wanted to be a good Christian. And so eventually after that, I actually was engaged to be married right then. And a month and a half later, I was married and living in California. My husband was military, and he went to Vietnam. He came back from Vietnam. He decided he wanted to go into ministry, and so he enrolled in the Episcopal School Seminary in Austin as soon as he finished his military duty. And unfortunately, our marriage was troubled, and I didn't know why, but we had problems. I felt like in communicating, and we went to Christian counselor, and after one session, the Christian counselor had met with him, then with me, and said, divorce him. And it's like, I wasn't ready. I went to counseling not to divorce my husband, to make the marriage work. And she wouldn't explain why she thought I should divorce him. But then, a short time later, a professor from the seminary came over and said, your husband is either mentally ill or he's a pathological liar. I don't know which, but we're kicking him out of seminary. So he was kicked out of seminary. Well, we stayed together a bit longer until I found him in a relationship with a man. He was having an affair with another man. And after that, it was the height of the AIDS epidemic. It was like, I decided it was time to divorce. And we did divorce. We separated, divorced. And I went to nursing school. And I was at my last semester in nursing school. And I learned that my sister had leukemia. And 3 days later, she was dead. And I was a parent of a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. And I was going to nursing school. I was in an efficiency. I had to have a place to live that would house the 2 kids, me, and my mother was going to move down to help me with the kids. And I just really needed a place that was close to schools. I mean, there were different, one was in middle school, one was early high school. And I didn't want my mother driving all over. God provided the perfect place, a beautiful place. The school bus stopped at the front door. So it took the kids didn't even have to cross the street. And they were all the buildings, the high school, the elementary, even the middle school were all on the same campus. It was the Bergstrom Air Force Base school for their kids. So anyway, God really blessed that period of time, but the kids wanted to go back to Houston. They had lived in Houston, they wanted to go back. And so I got a job in Houston, and eventually got a job as assistant director of the American Red Cross and director of disaster nursing for Houston. Well, Hurricane Alicia came along, and it was, as hurricanes go, it wasn't a bad one, but it did result in a lot of flooding. It resulted in power outages and a lot of tornadoes. There were deaths, there was people suffering because of the heat. And the sheriff department decided I needed to be the one to decide who got the emergency generators they had. So I was taking calls constantly and trying to figure out who might be the right recipient of these few generators they had. And I had to visit shelters. I had all kinds of emergency calls. The national director had come down. She did not like how I handled anything. When the hurricane actually hit, 911 shut down, and the fire department, all emergency things shut down. I didn't shut down, and as a result, I was caught on the phone night and day talking to people who were in dire situations. A woman who was trapped in her bed by a tree that had fallen across her, and her husband was in bed with her. He was dead. And there was another incident just like that. Another woman lost her 5 kids. It was extremely stressful for me. I had, and then to have the national director thinking I should have just turned off the phones made it even worse. And so I was so stressed out and so exhausted, I went and got some counseling. Well, that didn't go well, and it wasn't the counselor's fault. I wasn't exactly honest with the counselor about how very depressed I was, or how very tired I was. And finally, things snapped for me. She asked me what would make me happy, and I could think of nothing. Now, in reality, lots of things made me happy, even then. But at that moment in time, I could think of nothing. And it bothered me so much that I did not want to live. So I went and I got a gun. I asked God to forgive me. I put the gun to my head and I shot myself. That same day, another boy was in the post office, and the woman next to him dropped her purse. She had the same caliber weapon that I used, and he died. And my gun I put straight, point blank, right at my head, and I lived. Yes, I was now paralyzed on the left side, but it was a miracle that I lived, and that didn't do a lot for my depression, unfortunately. In fact, now I knew that I could do even less, and every day I prayed that God would just take my life. Now, I wasn't in any danger at this point in dying, but for 3 years I prayed, Lord, let me die or heal me. Well, God healed me. Now, if you look at me, you don't see a healed person, but I do. I know that God has healed me. It's true that I have all these physical limitations, but God has removed how I view things. God allows me to see only the good. In fact, I started a notebook when God did his healing of all the good things that had happened to me just in the past month, and I was overwhelmed. I'd gone out to lunch with people, and they asked what I was doing. I said, I'm writing a book, and they said, oh, you need a computer. Another woman said, oh, and I've got one in the trunk. Let me get it for you. And then I went to a church service as a guest, and the greeter I recognized immediately because she was indicted with 5 other nurses for murder, which was a crazy charge. She was acquitted. But I asked her, well, what are you doing now? I knew she wasn't nursing. She said, well, I started a publishing company. And I told her about my book, and she said, I want to see it. And so she published it. And I thought, now nobody is going to buy my book. It's about nursing homes. Who on earth is going to buy a nursing home book? Well, corporations bought it, hundreds of copies, because they wanted to give it to all their residents of the nursing homes they had. So God abundantly blessed that. And anyway, then I thought, okay, I'm recovered. I really felt recovered. I felt like God had really turned my life around. But then a friend had me come over and stay with her little girl while she went shopping because her baby was sick. And when she came home, she was just giddy. She was so happy. She said, oh, guess what? MD Anderson needs a volunteer chaplain, and you'd be perfect. And I thought, no, not me. You've got the wrong person. And I thought, and before I could even really say that, she had called MD Anderson and set up an appointment for me to interview. And I thought, well, as soon as they meet me, they're going to know I'm not the right person at all. Well, the opposite was true. You'd have thought I was a long-lost friend or something. We're so happy to see you. How did you know we needed a volunteer? We haven't advertised for years. I said, well, she said she saw it in the ad in the paper. And they said, no, we haven't put any ads in the paper. But anyway, that's how I ended up initially as a volunteer chaplain. Well, day one, I went with the Episcopal chaplain to see a patient, a young mother. She had 3 boys. She was very disturbed and depressed. She had 6 months to live, and it had been 6 months. And she had lost her job before she came into the hospital. She'd been fired for missing too many days. She'd been evicted from her apartment. All of her furniture, everything had been thrown out, put out on the lawn. We prayed. Oh, she said, but the real problem was her sons. What was going to happen to her boys when she died? So she asked for prayer. We prayed for her. Well, the next day she was so happy. She said, you're not going to believe. A woman she had never met, or thought she had never met, but went to her church, had come from out of town because she was not from Houston, and said, I saw all your belongings out on the lawn where you used to live, and I learned you were being evicted. I hope you don't mind. I picked it all up and took it to my house for safekeeping. And I have a large 2-bedroom, and why don't you come and live with me when you get out? And I have my own business, and you can work for me if you want, when you feel like it, if you feel like it. And she said, but the best thing is my ex-husband called. We divorced because he was a really serious alcoholic. He had been in AA for a year. He had joined a church. He wasn't drinking anymore. He really wanted to have the boys. If anything happened to her, so she said everything got worked out, everything. God had taken care of it all. Well, that pretty much hooked me on MD Anderson. But it was that way every day. Every day, just incredible things happen. And then I had a patient that, an alcoholic and homeless gentleman with melanoma that had come in for another repeat treatment. And he didn't get it because when they did scans, they couldn't find any cancer, and they declared him, they discharged him, said he was healed. Well, I had another patient, though, a young mother, and she had 2 young children, and the husband had gone to get the children to say goodbye to their mother because the doctor said her lab was no longer compatible with life. He didn't even know how she was alive. Well, the children came down. They left a prayer request in the chapel to please heal our mother. And the woman's wall was covered in good well wishes. I mean, this woman was so well loved, it was unreal. She was really a devout Christian. Well, kids got to see her. They went home. She died the day they went home. And I was really upset, and I really prayed about that. It's like, why, God, I'm so thrilled you healed the man, but she had 2 children to raise, and I don't understand why you picked him and didn't choose to save her. And I knew that God spoke to me that day. God's words were, if you knew what was waiting for her, all the good things, you wouldn't have wanted to delay her coming home by 1 minute. And he said, and about her 2 children, they aren't her 2 children. They're my children, and they will be taken care of. And all through my time at Anderson, I came more and more to learn that God's timing is perfect. He knows the future. He knows what waits for people. We assume that if a person is terminally ill and suddenly gets well, they're going to have a wonderful life. So naturally, we want everyone to be healed. But God knows their future, and it may not be all that we think it could be. The world is full of evil people, and bad things happen to wonderful people. God takes people home on His time when He thinks it's right, and He knows what's best, and I came to really believe that. And then finally, another miracle, there's so many, but one that really touched me was a young man that had lung cancer and didn't have a lot of time to live, and he didn't have any visitors, none at all. His parents worked, and his wife was back home with 4 children to take care of, so she couldn't come in. And she lived about 400 miles away from Houston. They weren't close. And so he really had no visitors. And he said, it just is wrong. I'm dying. I ought to have somebody here. I ought to have family here. I ought to have somebody that cares about me. And I remembered so much how one of our pastors had talked about his friendship with Jesus. And so I prayed that that Jesus would be his friend. Well, he got better. He went home. He came back. He was a changed man. All he could talk about was his friend, Jesus. And I really, over the course of time, learned that a close relationship with God starts with prayer, starts with asking God for things, and knowing with absolute certainty God will answer. Now, He may answer no, but if He does, it's not because you aren't worthy of a yes. It's because He knows what's best. And so, but after only about 2 months at MD Anderson, I knew I was called to be a chaplain, and I enrolled in a seminary. And after a year in seminary, I was accepted at MD Anderson in their clinical pastoral education program, a fellowship, and I was paid chaplain for the next 2 years at MD Anderson. So I had a total of 3 years at MD Anderson, and it was one miracle after another. And I have really finally feel that I can truly say I have an abundant life. It's not just life, I have an abundant life. And I know that that's what God intends for every person. And I'm so grateful that we have a living God. He speaks to us through Scripture, and sometimes He says one thing to one person, and another person gets a different interpretation. But that's God speaking, and God did that a lot at MD Anderson. I'd go into a room and somebody would be really happy, and they'd say, wow, oh, I'm so happy, God's going to heal me. And I said, oh, really? What happened? He said, well, I just opened the Bible and look what it says. And I'd read it, and it didn't say anything about healing, but they saw healing, and they would be right. If they believed that's what it said, God would heal. And so I realized Scripture is alive, and it really can speak to us, and we can have a real relationship. God wants to be our friend. You know, once upon a time, the only people that could come into God's presence was the high priest. Once a year could go into the Holy of Holies, and only once a year, and then only after a lengthy purification process and sacrifice and all kinds of things. But that curtain was torn. God wants us to be in his presence. He invites us to be in his presence. He invites us to have a friendship with him. And so that's how I ended up a chaplain. Now, I could talk about miracles all day long because I saw him at Anderson, just unbelievable healings. And I'm really grateful for the people at MD Anderson. They taught me so much. And they themselves often said cancer was a wonderful thing, that they actually grew so much as people through their experience of dealing with cancer. Even people that lost loved ones sometimes came back and said, God has strengthened me so much through this. And God has, I never would have, I remember one woman saying, I never would have started my own business if my husband had lived. I never would have thought I could. But when he died, I had to do something. And God showed me that I could do this, and he made me successful. And so I know that adversity is not adversity. It's just an opportunity to grow. So anyway, I hope that edifies somebody, and I hope that somebody, anyway, in case people once felt sorry for me, don't. Obviously, my injuries are self-inflicted. I did this to myself, and yet God, like I said, I don't see myself as crippled. I see myself as healed. I know I have limits, but I had limits before I was disabled. I mean, I would have loved to have been an opera singer. It wasn't going to happen. Or other things, but, you know. And so, yes, there are things now that I can't do, but like I said, that's part of life. There are always things we can't do. We need to find the things we can do. And that's what God has led me to do. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, I'm glad.
Enjoyed it.
Well, thank you.